On December 21st, 2017, a maintenance worker was conducting a routine inspection of the vacant units in the Gwinnett Place Mall food court. The kind of walkthrough done periodically to check for leaks, pests, or general upkeep issues in spaces the mall was no longer actively leasing. One of those spaces was a former Subway restaurant. Gwinnett Place Mall had once been one of the busiest shopping centers in the Atlanta suburbs. The kind of place where generations of Gwinnett County residents came to shop, meet friends, and spend time after school. By 2017, parts of the mall had become much quieter. Storefronts were dark. Some spaces were vacant. The former Subway restaurant was one of them. The lights were off, and the space was no longer operating as a restaurant. During his inspection, the maintenance worker noticed that a side door to the unit, one that should have been locked, wasn't. He climbed over the front counter to get a look inside and check the space. What he found in the back room would become the beginning of a homicide investigation. A badly decomposed body was lying inside. The woman had clearly been dead for some time. Police were called. Investigators arrived. The vacant restaurant was no longer simply an empty commercial space. It was a crime scene. Blood and hair were found across two rooms. Shoe prints were visible in the blood. Finger marks and drag marks were also found, indicating that the body had been moved from one area of the space to another. But investigators still did not know who the woman was, and they did not yet know exactly how she had died. The condition of the body made the initial examination difficult. There were no obvious external signs of trauma that immediately explained the death. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation assisted local police with the identification. A composite sketch was prepared and released to the public on January 2nd, 2018, asking for help identifying the woman. Several tips about her possible identity were received. Investigators followed those leads, and with assistance from the medical examiner's office, the woman was eventually identified. She was 19-year-old Silling A man. The unidentified body now had a name, and with that identification, the investigation could begin reconstructing the final weeks of Silling's life. The questions also changed. Investigators needed to establish how she died. They needed to determine when she died. They needed to understand what had happened inside the vacant restaurant, and they needed to determine who was responsible. The medical examination became central to answering those questions. The autopsy indicated that Silling died from asphyxiation caused by intense pressure on her chest. A Gwinnett County police lieutenant later described the injury pattern as consistent with someone sitting on her chest and restricting her ability to breathe. Silling had 4 fractured ribs. Her right ring finger had also been badly injured. Investigators described the damage as consistent with tremendous force. Toxicology provided another part of the picture. Investigators said Silling had no drugs in her system. The amount of alcohol detected was not considered enough to explain her death. The medical findings changed the direction of the investigation. This was no longer simply the case of an unidentified woman found inside an abandoned restaurant. The medical evidence established that Silling Man had been killed. The crime scene provided another layer of evidence. Blood had been found across the floor. Hair had been recovered. Shoe prints were visible in the blood. Finger marks and drag marks were present. The forensic examination was beginning to connect the physical evidence at the scene with the findings from the medical examination. Investigators believed Silling had been killed inside the vacant restaurant, but they still needed to determine who had been with her. Investigators continued examining the evidence. Then they found something that would become particularly significant. A fingerprint belonging to Emmett Davis was found in Silling's blood on a wall inside the room where she died. The fingerprint was physical evidence connecting Davis to the scene where investigators believed Silling had been killed. Now another question emerged. Who was Emmett Davis, and what was his connection to Silling? After Silling was identified, police spoke with her relatives. They provided investigators with information about Silling and her relationship with Davis. Investigators also began looking into Silling's activities and acquaintances. People who knew about her activities and her relationship with Davis provided information that helped investigators reconstruct the final weeks of her life. Detective Brian Dorminey later described some of what investigators learned about Silling A. Man. She was 19 years old and lived in Lawrenceville, Georgia. She was a sophomore at Georgia State University and had earned the Zell Miller Scholarship. She was working toward a future in nursing and had been working at the Michael Kors store at Perimeter Mall. People who knew her described her as ambitious, hardworking, and academically driven. Silling had been reported missing by a family member on October 8, 2017. She returned home shortly afterward, and the missing person case was closed. Her family later told investigators that she left again around October 10th. No additional missing person report was filed. Investigators were also learning about the people and circumstances surrounding her final weeks. One of the most important was Emmett Davis, the 21-year-old man who had been in a relationship with Silling. Davis was 21 years old and from Lawrenceville. Police identified him as Silling's boyfriend. Investigators believe that after Silling left home, she and Davis had been living together in hotels around the Gwinnett Place Mall area. Investigators later learned more about their relationship through people who knew Silling. Her relatives spoke with police after her identification and provided information about Davis. Investigators also spoke with Davis by phone. The relationship now became directly relevant to the investigation. The couple had stayed at hotels near the mall. At one hotel, a manager noticed bruising around Silling's eyes and called police. Officers arrived, but Silling did not speak to them. At another hotel, a necklace was left behind. Silling's family told investigators that the necklace was important to her and that she normally would not have taken it off. These details gave investigators more information about Silling's final weeks and her relationship with Davis. The investigation then moved through the final weeks of Silling's life. On November 15th, Silling and Davis went to a tattoo shop together, where they received matching face tattoos. According to testimony, they arrived wearing matching outfits and aviator sunglasses. During the appointment, the tattoo artist also saw a handgun fall from Davis's pocket. 5 days later, on November 20th, Silling returned to the Michael Kors store at Perimeter Mall to collect her final paycheck. That visit became an important point in the investigation because it established that Silling was still alive more than a month after she had left home for the second time. But people at the store also noticed that something appeared to be wrong. A manager became concerned and contacted police. By the time officers arrived, Silling had already left. Investigators then turned to the digital trail. On November 30th, phone and Uber records placed Silling and Davis at Gwinnett Place Mall at approximately 3:40 in the morning. Later that day, Silling's phone showed its last recorded activity. After that, there was no further recorded activity from her phone. Investigators later placed Silling's death sometime between November 30th and December 7th. That timeline brought investigators back to the vacant restaurant where her body had been found. There, the forensic evidence began to connect the final movements of Silling and Davis to the place where investigators believed she had been killed. Blood and hair had been recovered from the scene. Shoe prints were visible in the blood. Finger marks and drag marks were also present. And then investigators found something more specific. A fingerprint belonging to Emmett Davis was found in Silling's blood on a wall inside the room where she died. After the fingerprint evidence and the information investigators had gathered about Davis and Silling, the investigation continued to focus on Davis. Detectives had learned that Davis was Silling's boyfriend and that the two had been staying together in hotels near Gwinnett Place Mall during the period Silling was missing. Investigators then spoke with Davis by phone. During that conversation, Detective Brian Dorminey later testified that he asked Davis when he had last seen Silling. Davis said it had been a couple of weeks earlier, but investigators already knew that Silling had died before that time. Davis was no longer in Georgia. According to police, he had left the state following Silling's death. Investigators continued working the case while Davis was away, and they remained in contact with him by phone. Then investigators learned that Davis had returned to Lawrenceville area and was living there again. That changed the situation. On June 14, 2018, detectives obtained arrest warrants for Davis. They also obtained a search warrant for his home. Davis was taken into custody without incident. He was 21 years old. Nearly 6 months had passed since Silling's body had been discovered inside the vacant restaurant. Davis was initially charged with aggravated assault and felony murder. The arrest did not end the investigation. 2 weeks later, at a preliminary hearing, Detective Dorminey described more of the evidence investigators had gathered. He testified about the hotels where Silling and Davis had stayed, the bruising noticed by a hotel manager, the necklace left behind, the matching tattoos, and the evidence recovered from the vacant restaurant. Most importantly, he described the fingerprint investigators had found in Silling's blood on the wall. The case then moved into the next stage of the legal process. In September 2018, a Gwinnett County grand jury indicted Davis on 6 charges: malice murder, felony murder, aggravated battery, aggravated assault, theft by taking, and theft by deception. The theft allegations involved Silling's iPhone. Prosecutors allege that Davis took the phone around the time of her death and pawned it on December 23rd, 2 days after Silling's body was discovered. The indictment placed Silling's death between November 30th and December 7th, but an indictment was not a conviction. It meant that prosecutors had formally charged Davis and would have to prove the case through the legal process. The investigation had already produced evidence from the vacant restaurant: the medical examination, digital records, and witnesses who had encountered Silling during her final weeks. Now those allegations and evidence would move through the courts. For Silling's family, the case had already taken them from a missing person report to the discovery of her body, then to identification, a homicide investigation, and finally an arrest and indictment. The case then moved into the longer process of the criminal courts. Davis remained in custody without bond as the case proceeded. The publicly documented material available for this investigation records the arrest, preliminary hearing, and September 2018 indictment, but it does not provide a verified final conviction or sentence. And so, the investigation had begun with an unidentified body inside a vacant restaurant had reached an important point, but not every question had been answered publicly. Investigators had established Silling's identity. The medical examination had established that her death was a homicide. The investigation had reconstructed important parts of her final weeks. Evidence had connected Davis to the crime scene. He had been arrested, and a grand jury had indicted him. But the available record did not provide the final legal outcome. For Silling's family, the identification of her body had answered the question of who had been found inside that vacant restaurant. The homicide investigation had answered how she died. The indictment had established what prosecutors accused Davis of doing. But the final chapter of the criminal case remained outside the documented record available for this story. And that is where the case remains unresolved in the material we can responsibly present. Silling Man is remembered by the people who knew her not for where her story ended, but for who she was before it did. A scholarship student with a plan, a job, a family that took her in, and a future in caring for others that she was still in the process of building, right up until the moment someone she trusted took all of it away from her. There is another part of Silling's story that deserves to be remembered. During her final weeks, people around her noticed signs that something was wrong. A hotel manager saw bruising around her eyes and called the police. Officers arrived, but Silling did not speak to them. Later, a manager at the Michael Kors store became concerned about her appearance and contacted police again. By the time officers arrived, Silling had already left. Her family had also reported her missing once before. She returned home, and the case was closed. When she left again, no second missing person report was filed. None of these moments caused Silling's death, and none of them should be used to blame the people who were trying to respond to what they could see at the time. But together, they reveal something important about situations involving intimate partner violence. Sometimes the people around a victim can see the warning signs before they understand the full danger. Sometimes help is offered, but the person experiencing the abuse is not ready or able to accept it. And sometimes the person who needs help may be the only one who knows how much danger they are actually facing. That is why one of the most important things this story can leave behind is simple. If you are in a relationship that is becoming frightening, controlling, or violent, you do not have to wait until something worse happens before asking for help. And if someone you trust reaches out to you, take that opportunity seriously. You do not have to explain everything at once. You do not have to have the perfect words. You do not have to face it alone. Because sometimes the opportunity to get help comes in a small moment. A question from someone who noticed something, a phone call, a conversation, a chance to tell someone what is really happening. Silling's story cannot be changed, but perhaps someone watching the story is living through something she could not escape. And perhaps that person will recognize a warning sign, recognize an opportunity for help, and choose to open the door before it becomes too late.